Good afternoon, everyone. I have been informed that Mr. Jha, who is our last panelist for the day, is just facing one or two login issues, and he's just getting logged in. While that happens, we can start the webinar. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and a very good afternoon to all the speakers and the delegates who've joined this RW Roundtable on EV supply equipment. So this roundtable is a part of our webinar series called RW Roundtable on EV charging. And the first one that we did in this series was on potential of battery swapping, which we did 3 weeks back. And now this is the second one. Then we plan to do another one on role of utilities and the last one of charging networks and on interoperability. Now, the aim with which we plan to organize all of these roundtables for you is to provide an understanding of the opportunities and challenges in the adoption of EV supply equipment in India. And we hope that this webinar will provide a platform for useful exchange of information and ideas on the strategies to further increase the setting up of Evsc and help boost EV adoption. And throughout the event, I would request all the delegates to keep posting their comments or questions in the Q&A box so that our speakers could answer them. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And we have a very, expert set of panelists here. So it will do a lot of good to everyone if, we can keep it very interactive. And before we start the actual event, I will introduce the panelists. We have with us Mr. Awadhesh from Fortum Charge and Drive India, Mr. N. Mohan from CESL, which is Convergence Energy Services Limited, Mr. Ravikiran Annaswamy from Numocity Technologies, and Mr. Varun Chaturvedi from Volttic EV Charging. A very warm welcome to all of you. And thank you for agreeing to be a part of this. And I, along with my colleague Sarthak, will be moderating this webinar. I will introduce all the panelists one by one. Brief introductions. So Mr. Jha is Executive Director of Fortum Charge and Drive India. He has been working with Fortum since July 2014. Prior to Fortum, he worked with Ministry of Water Resources for 15 years, followed by 6 years in Hindustan Power Projects Private Limited, where he was instrumental in securing concession of hydro projects and its development. He has over 3 decades of experience in the energy industry, spanning across government and private sector. He brings with him first-hand experience in policy formulation, strategic planning, general management, business development, project development, land acquisition, asset management of solar projects, and various other roles in businesses that he has experience in. He is a civil engineering graduate. He also holds a master's in business administration for working managers from IIM Lucknow. Then we have with us Mr. N. Mohan, who is Deputy General Manager, Head EV Charging Infrastructure, CESL. He has over 15 years of experience in policy planning, conceptualization, and implementation of energy efficiency programs. He's leading EV penetration in the country through the deployment of reliable charging infrastructure. Under his guidance, CESL, a subsidiary of ESL, has deployed more than 400 plus public charging stations, equivalent to 815 charging points, and has plans to deploy more than 5,000 PCS by the end of 2025. Prior to CESL, he worked with MS Hopes Marshall Limited and Triveni Turbines Limited, Bangalore. He's a mechanical engineer by training with an MBA in marketing and international business. He's also certified energy auditor as notified by BE, Ministry of Power. Mr. Ravikiran Annaswamy is CEO and co-founder at Numocity Technologies. He's very passionate about clean mobility and works towards accelerating electric mobility in India and the world market. He has over 27 years of experience as an entrepreneur and as a business leader at Nokia Siemens Networks and Siemens AG. He was instrumental in launching and scaling frugal and innovative solutions like mobile prepaid, data charging, and various fast solutions in India and global markets. He's also a serial entrepreneur and passionate to incubate new startups. He holds an MBA from IIM Bangalore and has graduated from UVCE Bangalore. Mr. Varun Chaturvedi is founder and CEO of Volttic EV Charging. He's an industry leader with background of electrical engineering, fully complementing Volttic business model. He's leading Volttic fiercely to become one of the leading EV charging players in India and at the same time expand to other geographies as well. Established in 2017, Volttic currently operates 400 plus charge points across India. It currently serves majority of EV fleet operators and has deployed charging points for many corporates. Volttic has its own advanced technology-based IoT cloud platform with mobile app for public charging. Right. With those round of introductions complete, we are now set to begin the panel discussion. The format is going to be that I and along with my colleague Sarthak, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and followed by that, we can take up some questions with the audience. And I request you to please jump in whenever you feel that you would like to voice out an opinion or would like to add something to whatever the other panelist is speaking on. So I'll start with Mr. Jha. Mr. Jha, just brief, 3 to 4 minutes remarks on what your company does and what is your operational portfolio, what is your experience and the geographical locations that you operate in. At this time, I would request you to not focus too much on the challenges and opportunities, etc., because those questions will take on later as well. Mr. Jha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think there are certain issues with my camera.
All right.
Let me see. Anyway, let me not spend the time. I'll fix my camera later. So yes, so I'm responsible for setting up the charging infrastructure for Fortum Charge and Drive, and Fortum Charge and Drive is a subsidiary of Fortum OIJ Finland, and Fortum itself is an energy utility company. But coming back to Fortum Charge and Drive India, so as I said that from 2017 we are into the business of setting up the charging infrastructure in India. And right now we are operating close to 200 charging points in the public space for the end user or the end EV user to come and charge. And primarily the business model is the pay as you use. So pay per use model is the current business model. And as a company, our objective is to have democratization of the EV charging in India, because India is such a large country that not one or two organizations can serve the entire length and breadth of the country. So what we require is the democratization, and there the government of India has done a lot of good work in terms of enabling policy provisions like making this a de-licensed activity, setting up the charging infrastructure. So there we offer now the franchise opportunity to the entrepreneurs. If they have the minimum area of space under their control, and if they have the interest to serve to the public charging, not for the captive, but for the public charging, where anybody can go and use the charging facilities under our brand name, where we will extend the technical expertise, we will extend the operational knowledge and all the aspects. So we are into the, another aspect of the business for democratizing is that we appoint the franchise and that opportunity we offer to the all general public in the country. And the third business model which we do, we believe that because we have a 10-year strong, credible platforms of managing the charging infrastructure, because we are the largest in the Norway. And we started operations in Norway in 2011 when the EV was just making the beginning in Norway. And today Norway has close to 80% annual sales on the electric. So we have that platform which has been proven scalable, which has been proven reliable. So we are open to share our platform with other prospective CPOs if they are interested. So we can white label their entire applications, and they can start, they don't have to invest in the software or the platform itself just for managing the charging infrastructure. So that's the another business model which we offer for enabling the ecosystem to develop. And the latest which we have offered is that we have started aggregating the CPOs. We are offering the roaming arrangements with other charge point operators, where as an end user, you would be benefited in the sense that you don't have to carry so many apps in the long term. If you carry one app and it has a roaming platform with 3-4 partners, then at least those locations can be accessed by using our applications. So these are the 4 business models currently we are operating. I will take a pause here and Khushbu, back to you, and then I'll be happy to come back with any follow-up questions.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Mohan, on to you, your initial remarks on what CESL does and the operational experience and what is your capacity currently.
Yeah, thank you, Khushbu. So as a company at CESL, we are working the electric mobility ecosystem. So primarily, we're promoting the electric vehicles. We have an electric mobility lease plan also, where we lease electric cars to the institutions. We're also getting the demand for electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Now, since we understand like electric mobility requires a strong financing platform also, we're trying to enable that financing through empanelment of some of the commercial financing institutes. So the end user can acquire these electric vehicles under the lease plan. So thus we are trying to upscale these. There is an electric mobility adoption in the electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers segment is concerned. In the four-wheelers, largely work with the government institutions, and so far we deployed more than 2,000 electric cars to the government institutions, and thus like replacing their conventional IC vehicles with electric vehicles. So initially we also supported them with the electrical charging infrastructure by putting up a captive charging stations within their premises. So at least like these vehicles could be recharged within their premises, and these electric cars could be used by the institutions equivalently as used by the IC counterpart. And further, we're also putting up reliable public EV charging stations across India, and primarily we work with some of the urban local bodies, the distribution companies, the development authorities. We partner with them on a revenue sharing model, where typically we bring in the investment for the charging infrastructure, and subsequently we'll have a revenue sharing arrangement with the land partners. And we deployed more than 400 public EV charging stations across the country. And since we understand like there is a larger opportunity for the charging business, now we are working on a partnership model, which we call as an build, own and operate model, where we are trying to onboard some of the private companies who work as the CPOs, and where as a company we'll take the lead of enabling that land partnerships. So presently, one of the key barrier in the industry is getting that land parcel for setting up an EV charging station. So as a CSL, we are trying to enable that gap, where we are trying to help the CPOs to partner with us, and where CSL will enable that land partnership. And typically companies, the CPOs will build up the EV charging stations depending upon their business model and the target vehicle segment. So we're trying to expand this for highways and expressways also. And recently we concluded the procurement for 810 EV chargers, and the bids have been opened now. And we're evaluating the bids, and hopefully by another 2 weeks time, we should be able to implement this CPO model for highways and the expressways. And we plan to at least like support some of the electric bus initiatives also, where CSL has done recently the bulk procurement of 5,450 electric buses. And through this aggregation model, we're able to bring down the cost significantly low. So this is being done on the GCC contracting model for 5 STUs under the FAME2 initiative. So these are some of the initiatives where we work in the electric mobility domain. So I'll take a pause here and be happy to respond again.
Right. Mr. Annaswamy, your initial brief remarks on what your company does and what is your capacity, etc.
Thank you, Kushbu, and good afternoon to all. Our company, Numocity, is a nearly 4.5-year-old company. We are one of the cogs in the ecosystem. We are a pure digital player. We do not set up infrastructure, we do not operate infrastructure, but we provide technologies to people who want to do all of this. And that's been our positioning all the time, and that's what we offer to all our customers. Our customers are typically charge point operators, vehicle OEMs, battery OEMs, multiple of these players. And our products are spread across how to manage a charger network. So we are not looking at, we are not an app provider, we are actually the network provider. We manage the complete cloud-based software to manage large networks. So that's one area, that's our one portfolio. Then we look at battery swap systems, and also we look at the future impact of what chargers will do with grid, with batteries, several products which are built around, everything around what energy value chain is. Whatever happens with energy, we have digital products. And we work with some of the largest charge point operators in India, outside India, in several countries, providing them the platforms and enterprise grade platforms. That's where we differentiate and we specialize. We not only make software from software as a service point of view for smaller players, we also have our digital products for large players. More like a product company. We are a product company offering digital products, and that's our vision, and that's what we want to be in several countries, which is already we are, but we are looking at a large, rapid scale. And at the same time, our always the goal is to be the best digital product company coming out of India in the EV space. We are not designing just for India. Our goal is to be world's best platform in that sense. I think that's what we are working towards. And I'll stop with that. I'll take questions as it comes.
Right. Mr. Chaturvedi, your brief remarks, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for inviting us, being from Volttic side. We are working on charging infrastructure. So on charging infrastructure, we are trying to capture all the ecosystem, like either it is home charging, either it's a commercial charging. We are providing all kind of solutions. Our target segments right now majorly is the fleet operators, where we are serving mostly four-wheeler fleets. Recently, we started with three-wheeler and two-wheeler as well, those who are having fast charging facilities. Public charging infrastructure, we are slightly slow because of utilization factors and other challenges, but we are coming slowly on that part, where we are partnering on the use case or the users, mostly commercial users. If they are looking such kind of supports, we are developing. We have a home charger mostly suitable as a slow charging. So that is where we are deploying across the real estate, housing societies. It could be a hotel, it could be other new developed real estate infra. So there we are serving. On the commercial charging, we, as I mentioned, we are more focused on the commercial fleet. So that is where we are very working as a very serious note. And we are deploying mostly right now those who are working in B2B implied transportation and some B2C like Ola, Uber kind of platform, those who are operating. Since currently the major adoptions is on the commercial segment, so that is where we are trying to tap those opportunity as a prime focus. And in that, as you know, currently the challenge, whatever the vehicles available in the passenger segments, they have a range issues and a high charging time. So that is where our charging station is mostly located as per their convenient place. It could be their operating locations, like corporate locations. It could be their hubs, or in the wayside charging, where they prefer to come easily get the charging. So that is our current forte, where we are trying to build an ecosystem. Parallelly, as I mentioned, we are also taking care of public charging infrastructure, and soon we are going to come with a bus charging. Some projects we are targeting are in discussions. So as a Volttic, we are end-to-end solutions provider, hardware integrated with the software platform. We have our own CPO software platform and the services. So in that, we have our own business model where we invest, own and operate. And recently, we also started a franchise model where we are onboarding lots of interested people, those who are looking to invest and to be a part of EV charging infrastructure. So with that, we are right now working with more than 400 charge points across India. Our presence is across the geography, but more limited to metros, where Bangalore is our major operation, then Chennai, Hyderabad, Delhi, Gurgaon, Noida, Jaipur, Mumbai, Pune. Slowly, we are expanding to other capital cities. And then in the phase-wise manner, we are targeting to tier 2, tier 3 cities with the target. In next 5 years, we are trying to build a network of more than 10,000 charge points. But as I mentioned, major focus is on the utilization factor. We are always believing that ecosystem should develop, but same time viability and sustainability is also important. So with this, we are moving ahead. So this is from a quick introduction from my side. I think we should go for the question and answer session. Yeah.
Sure. So, Mr. Chau, my first question is to you that, you've been in this space for some years now. So what has been, the initial experience of Fortum Charge and Drive in Indian EV charging market, and how have you seen the landscape evolving over the past years?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So, see, this is our Nordic experience. What we knew that the public charging infra has.
Can you be a little louder, please? We can hear you, but your voice is a little low.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it better?
Yeah, definitely. Much better.
Okay. So essentially what I was trying to say that, whatever experience we had from the Nordic, we felt that the public charging would shift their scale in favor of EV adoption. You can have the starting with the charging at the home, at the workplace, but it is the public charging which will instill confidence in the mind of the hesitant consumers that if I drive the electric vehicle and if I get stuck on the road, where can I get charged? They need to be assured of this infrastructure part, the public charging infrastructure part, where they can access without any restrictions at any point of time. And that has been our learning from the Nordic, where the people have started with the home charging. Unlike India, they have a huge, I would say, the space available. And at home, everybody has a heating arrangement as well. But a learning was that the public charging is a must in order to remove the range anxiety, fear in the mind of the customer. So keeping that in view, what we felt initially that the Nordic experience or the consumer experience has to be pleasant at the public charging. That was the aspect through which we wanted to do this one. So what we have felt that the government came up with the good regulations, with the positive regulations. But as a stakeholder, particularly the customers, their experience was very, very positive for us. Their feedback was very, very positive for us. When we set up the first public charging in 2018 July, at that point of time, we had decided that this has to be do-it-yourself model. You can't have the luxury of having a person deployed at the public charging stations and operating it for yourself as that we are used to in the ICE vehicle. So it was on the do-it-yourself model where you are empowering the people by giving access to them through the app or through the RFID that they can decide the locations, they can decide the timing, they can choose the pricing, which price I have to charge the vehicle. And that was a fantastic, I would say, feedback from the customers that they were liking it. And this was an expected line because the digital world, everybody wants to, everybody wants to believe that we need to have this independence where we can decide and we can go and we can charge our vehicle at my choice. Yes, what happened? The problem, I would say, especially when you say the emerging business model or the cost viability of the charging infrastructure. I believe the charging infrastructure has to be seen from the perspective of the long term, not for the 2 years, 3 years business. But if you consider it as an infrastructure business, in that case, this becomes a viable proposition. This I'm talking about public charging. Clearly, this depends upon the uptake of the electric vehicle. And it has started picking up now. For last 1 year, if you see the electric four-wheelers sales, and similarly the two-wheelers and three-wheelers have picked up very fast. And the more and more vehicles are on road, this will make the cost viability of the public charging much favorable in times to come. So this has been our initial experience with the charging infrastructure.
So, sorry. I was muted. Mr. Mohan, would you like to add to that, or do you agree? Do you disagree with whatever he just said?
No, I agree with Mr. Awadhesh. So basically, we also as a CPO, we started building up the public charging stations in 2019. And initially, we built up only the 15 kilowatt or what we call as Bharat DC chargers. At that point in time, only we had 1 or 2 electric vehicle model which are compatible with those kind of EV chargers. Way back in 2019. And lastly, we have seen almost 2 years, the utilization was well below 5%. Now, gradually, we are seeing the utilization growing about 12% to 13%. There are 2 specific reasons. One is now even the Bharat DC chargers, which were earlier used by some of the first generation electric vehicles, are now being adopted by the commercial fleet operators. So obviously, there is a demand which is coming up for these type of EV charging station. And the second factor is that some of the electric three-wheelers are also making their vehicles compatible for this type of rapid charging. So obviously, it's getting us a good traction for these type of chargers, especially like if you're focused towards like electrifying the three-wheelers and the commercial fleet segment. But when it comes to electric four-wheelers on the personal mobility segment is concerned, you need to understand the trajectory of the industry. Initially, the battery capacity was in the range of say 18 to 20 kilowatt hour, and the range was around say 130 to 140 kilometers. Gradually, the battery size increased around say 30 to 45 kilowatt hour batteries, and the range touched around 220 kilometers. It's gone up to 300 kilometers. Now we are seeing an industry trend where the battery capacity is growing almost like 45 kilowatt hour. It's going as high as 90 kilowatt hour. Here, the indication is that the people are expecting a longer range. So the industry is trying to put in the higher capacity batteries to at least like ensure that they are targeting the right customers. Recently, the launch by all the auto OEMs, the battery capacity are way above 45, and it's going as high as like 90 kilowatt hour, and where the range is almost like touching 550 kilometers. I see the sweet convincing point for any customers would be the 400 kilometer range. If somebody is like planning to buy an electric vehicle, where 400 kilometers would be a sweet point where the OEMs could convince any customers to opt for the electric vehicle. This is one indication. That's why like we're also slowly trying to see how perhaps we can build a charging station for the future requirement also. If I start putting the lower capacity chargers, I may perhaps like able to cater some of the electric vehicles which are presently there in the Indian market. But if you want to look at the future opportunity, we need to go for a higher capacity stations, which can able to at least like cater to the existing vehicle segment also. But equally, we can at least like complement the future next generation electric vehicles. So gradually we start focusing towards building up the high capacity fast chargers, where we're putting up the capacity ranging from 50 kilowatt. We're also putting up close to almost like 100 kilowatt capacity chargers across many cities. And we see there is a large acceptance by the personal mobility users also, where the time is one factor, time is one indication where customers say they need to have a less charging time for electric vehicles. So time is one of the determinant factor which the CPUs has to consider while designing or building up the public charging station. The second, some of the learnings when it comes to public charging stations are, since these are building up public locations which are open for general public 24/7, we see a lot of public vandalism or misuse of these operating stations, because operating a public charging station is a big challenge, because the cost of insurance goes very high. The moment we have some of the instances of theft or the damages, the cost of the insurance goes very high. Now, almost like what are the premium we used to pay 2 years, now that the risk perception has increased, now the premiums increased by almost 25%. That is an additional expense once the CPS has to consider while building those EV charging station. The other learning from our side was many of the components in the public charging stations are not designed for the public use. So basically, like it's not meant for the rugged use or rough use by the general public. We see a lot of damages in the external display units. The guns are getting damaged. There is no like one-to-one replacement. The entire component has to be replaced. So there's an additional cost the CPS has to pay while operating the public charging station. So already the business is a long-term payback period. Adding this additional expense towards the insurance, towards the replacement expenses, is still adding additional investment for the CPUs. And currently, with such the nominal utilization factor, the CPUs are still trying to work different business model to see there is a sustainability in the operation. So we had a lot of learning on how this could be addressed. And constantly, we also try to advise the manufacturers how they could redesign their product, and how some of the issues which we currently are facing could also be made as an improvement in their product and specifications. These are some of the learnings. So I'm happy to add more points.
All right. Just one question before I move to Mr. Chaturvedi. From your experience, do you feel captive charging is more, attractive from a CPO perspective than public charging?
Yeah, so you need to understand these are two different business models. When it comes to captive charging station, there is a commitment by the fleet operators. They assure at least X units or X utilization every month. So obviously, as a CPO, at least they can see there is an confirmed revenue every month. So if I am making an investment in the captive charging station, I am very sure that I can bill X lakh rupees every month. I'll be getting X lakhs rupees from the fleet companies. But when it comes to public charging station business, there's no confirmed utilization which you can track or gain from the end customers. But these are like long-term investment, because we feel the captive stations are essential, because initially the fleet companies, they need to have their quick recharging stations where a large number of electric vehicles could be charged at single locations. But largely when they expand their operations across cities, putting up dedicated captive charging station may not be viable. So because these fleets are meant for B2B or B2C operations, where trip routes are not defined, based on the customer requirement, they need to carry out the trips. So invariably, we need to design the public charging station, and they would rely on the public charging station when we're able to position those stations at a strategic location. That's where we're trying to see that we're trying to work with the fleet companies, trying to understand the requirement of locations where they would like to see the public charging station. Now we see instead of any vehicle going back to the captive station, consuming say around 20% or 30% of their the battery, they could still go to any of the nearby public charging station and they can get a quick top-up recharge, and they could do more number of trips in a day.
Right. Okay, got it. Mr. Chaturvedi, I'll come to you first, and Mr. Annaswamy, I have a slightly different question for you. So, Mr. Chaturvedi, your initial experience in this space as a CPO, and if you could also shed some light on, what has been the utilization like for you, and how has it improved over the past few years?
Yeah. So, from our perspective, we see in two angles on the EV charging infrastructure. Like if I give a user behavior within a city, there are multiple ways of charging. First is, of course, the home charging, then workplace charging. Lots of captive charging is going to happen. So as the volume increase of EV sales, same time, slow chargers will also increase because they are coming as accessories. Almost all vehicle, if you talk about a four-wheeler. Three-wheeler, of course, they are two-wheeler, they have a portable charger, same like our mobile phone. So they can easily plug in any 5 to 10 ampere socket. So within city, as a Volttic, we are not looking at to deploy very high capacity fast chargers, because we know there are multiple ways of charging available. So that is where we are more focused on the home charging and then captive charging, because even a personal user, whatever maximum their daily runs are 30 to 40 kilometers. I'm talking about within cities operation movement. So they can easily top up their vehicle either at home, either at workplace, because right now all the workplace are getting ready for EV charging infra, either for employee personal vehicle or employee fleets. So that's our strategy to deploy a mid-range of charging station combination with the slow charger within the city. Yeah, when it comes to the highways, of course, the only option is the fast chargers ranging from 50 to 100 kilowatt. Our 100 kilowatt is the ideal solution, but sometimes we feel the challenges, because we are talking about the challenges is the infrastructure, power infrastructure availability. So DISCOMs having their own perspective, each DISCOMs coming with the different rules, regulations, and all those things, putting this kind of infrastructure, their cost, then fixed demand charges, lots of things are there. So within city, developing this 100 kilowatt load capacity infrastructure, if you talk about a multiple number, it is quite difficult. But on the highways, because there are good amount of hotels, dhabas are available, so there it is quite easy. So we are moving with that thought process to develop the charging ecosystem. Now coming to the challenges, yeah, we have faced initial days. The first challenge was, I think, at that time, nobody was clear. Even lots of debate happened, whether it is a charging as a service or it is a sale of electricity. But now lots of things are clear. But the challenge remains same, to get the real estate and then the power infra. And that is where Mr. Mohan was mentioning that they are going to facilitate for the availability of land and real estate wherever they have a tie-up. So that is a good thing. Now government is also overcoming with that. Recent amendment in the guideline clearly mentioned that all the governments are going to get available on a cheaper rate, on a base rate of ₹1, and then subsequent there will be some bidding on that. So that was the first challenge. I think still on the private properties there are challenges because people are not considering this as a green mobility. They are taking this as a complete commercial options. So that the time when I approach to a mall or a hotel within a cities or sometime even highways, they are expecting a high amount of rent and all those things. So that because if I'm paying a high rent, of course, I'm going to recover from the end user who's going to use the services. So our tariff is going on a higher side. So that is a challenge. I think still there are challenges available because charging infrastructure, we cannot develop a standalone system. It should come with amenities. Second is the power availability. We always face a challenge. Wherever there is a captive charging happening, power is available. Turnaround time is quite less. Say within a week, we get the charging station up. But when it comes to the DISCOMs, they always ask for lots of documents and their own processes and all those things, and we end up with spending a month or more than that time. So this is on the development side. As one question, one point Mr. Mohan mentioned, abusing of the asset, the mishandling of the asset. Yes, we are also observing that people are not taking it very seriously. All chargers are unmanned, totally operated through a digital platform, mobile app, and all those things. So they have to use it responsibly. We have seen people, our drivers are, while talking the phone, they drag the guns, drag the chargers. So lots of precautions we are taking in terms of training, displays, and all those things. So these are some initial thoughts or initial experience which we faced. And we believe this will increase because now charging numbers are increasing across the cities or highways. So we have to think on that way, whether how the user behavior is going to happen and how they are going to respect our asset, because we are going to invest heavily on complete infrastructure. So these challenges we need to think how we can overcome. Also, every company is doing, I believe there are a good amount of work going on in terms of imparting training, display, science, and all those things are there. So this is our experience till now. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Annaswamy, the question that I had for you is that you mentioned that you're also present in the battery swapping space. So what has been your experience there since, that's a little different from everything else that we've discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. So see, that's a very different business model, right? I think there's a policy which has come out now, draft policy. There are different players. Though we started very early with battery swap way back in 2018, we have not deployed in a larger scale. Chargers have been on the larger scale. Battery swap with dedicated fleets and dedicated players trying it out is what our experience has been. It's fairly more complicated than EV charging. The reason being it is not standardized. Even though now in the policy there are elements of standards coming in, it is still not fully standardized. So which means you are now working with multi-vendor, multitude of APIs, multitude of data formats, which does not allow you to make it a very seamless experience. So for us to scale in battery swap, always one of my recommendation is that we need to bring in more standardization across all elements. I'm not about digital, but across all elements. And that would be a success factor for battery swap to come in. So that's only one part of it, to get the systems in place. Second would be to really come across or create a business model where the battery swap player actually gets his ROI in a better way, with or without fleets or without captive usage. Because it's a very asset-heavy business model for an energy as a service player. If somebody is offering battery swap, it's an asset-heavy business. So how does it work out? At what economies of scale will there be an ROI? There are multiple things which need to be sorted out before it starts to scale. And not to forget, they will depend heavily on digital layers in the backend, a lot of IoT getting involved, which means unless we also have our connectivity infrastructure in a good way, it could also create a lot of hassles. I mean, it's about not just creating a battery swap infrastructure, the connectivity infrastructure should be equally good for these systems to work. And also all the vehicles will get connected. So There are multiple complications when we try to do battery swap. As a pilot in a small scale, things will work. The moment we try to rapidly scale is where we will see all of these challenges. And I think everybody who's involved in this ecosystem should be aware of it, that as we scale, many of the challenges will hit us.
Sorry. Right. Okay. Mr. Jha, the next question is for you. That so you mentioned that there are so many challenges that charging infrastructure developers face. So what, according to you, are the steps required, or the measures required, or the government policies required to address these issues and make things easier for all stakeholders involved?
So I think, there are two primary challenges which need to be addressed. One is the access to the locations. And this I'm talking about the public charging and for the four-wheeler segment. So you need to have the access to the locations on a long-term basis, and then you need to have access to the upstream electricity infrastructure. These are the two important parameters for a CPOs. Obviously, the third being, the demand side, and on which nobody has a control. But on the two aspects, government has done certain steps, but I feel that those steps are not fully thought through. So taking the example, if I mix the two things, under the FAME 2, government provided a certain incentive for creating the charging infrastructure. But unfortunately, all those incentives were reserved for CPSUs, only for the public sector undertakings. Not a single private sector CPOs who are a full-fledged CPO, because unlike the PSUs, where they have, this is also one of the function, very small function, and they don't require even a subsidy. But the government decided that, for their good wisdom, government decided that all the subsidies which should go to the PSUs. Unfortunately, I don't have the latest data, but unfortunately, most of the locations which the DHI announced, most of the locations, I think majority of the locations have not come up on the ground, right? But in the process, what you have done, you have already crowded out the private sector from securing those public locations which was owned by the municipal corporations. So this is where the problem lies, and we have to address these problems. We have to address this. Otherwise, probably we will be discussing this again after 5 years. See, my recommendation is that this method of revenue sharing of 1 rupees per kWh, as they have mentioned in the guidelines, and then allow the bidding over on that, this is insane in India, especially for any technology which is in earlier stage. Because we are witness in the solar and especially in the thermal UMPP, that in India, we are insane in bidding. And the one example in the EV is the best tender, which has happened probably a couple of months back or 3 months back. The people had quoted that they can offer 10 rupees a unit to the government as a revenue sharing. As a full-fledged charge point operator, I just can't imagine, right? That where from you will pay 10 rupees to the government, how much you will recover from the customer, and how much money you will make. Now, because the bidding says that you have to give me, you quote how much money you can give it to me. The government should think that it is not for the maximization of the money for them. If they're really interested in creating the ecosystems, then they should fix a floor, 1 rupees or certain rental. They should fix a floor. And what they should do, they should every year, they should invite the bid and identify certain locations, and they should identify based on the techno-commercial feasibilities, a top 5 or top 6 in a city, CPOs, and just give them on the same terms and conditions, right? Transport for London has demonstrated this, that how in a congested city this can be done. Only thing is that in India, we believe that this we can't work. I'm surprised when in a country we can adopt the Swiss challenge methods. Why can't we adopt this kind of a bidding there? That will put everybody on at par, whether it is a PSUs or the private, everybody would be paying 1 rupees. Currently, what is happening? PSUs get the MOUs, they pay 1 rupee per unit. Whereas if you are a public sector, private sector, you'll have to go for a bidding. you might be expected to pay 10 rupees. Where from you'll get the money? Similarly, in Delhi tender, people have quoted negative. Now, again, it means that EV charging is a revenue earning business for the customer. You go and you are being paid for charging it. Now, these kind of a business model, if you don't check in the beginning, this is not going to solve your problem of the locations, number one. Number two, on the EV, on the upstream electricity infrastructure, government again has to make very clear. In the guidelines, they have mentioned that the DISCOMs can use the APRDP schemes for creating the upstream infrastructure so that the cost of the CPOs should go down. But I would be pleasantly surprised if DISCOMs allow this for the private sector. They might do it for the PSUs, but they might not do it for the private sector, right? So the point is, unless you address it, and my recommendation there is that under FAME 2, instead of this APRDP and all, which is under different regulations, different act, under FAME 2, out of those 1,000 crore, if you can allocate certain money towards upgradation of electricity infrastructure, that will serve much better purpose than taking the refuse under APRDP and other development scheme of the DISCOMs, because that's a highly regulated business. So I think this is something where the government has to work. Then only probably you will see the challenges getting faced. Otherwise, I mean, unlike as Varun said, we have a different experience. At least with the private real estate players, you know that what you are entering into. Very clear, whether it is high cost, high rental, whatever it is, upfront. And the talks are much more, I would say, straightforward. It might take longer time. But we don't have access to the government land, which is a majority of the landowner, public place. With municipal corporations, you have no access. You can't work with them. So this is an area which has to be addressed.
Right. Mr. Mohan, your thoughts on the key steps required to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, maybe some of the points what Mr. Awadhesh has informed about the key challenges. Yes, real estate is one key concern, and especially I think Ministry has done at least an exercise of making a revenue sharing model for the charging business. But in the guideline, they also talk about the RDSS scheme, that is a revamped distribution sector scheme, which mainly talks about providing some of the incentive for building the upstream or the upstream infrastructure for charging station, which may include the network augmentation also. And also the policy talks about a single part tariff for the EV charging station. So many positive steps have been taken in the guidelines. The required step is to implement those guidelines. There has to be an operational framework and structure where these guidelines could be implemented, which could benefit the private and the public CPOs. That is one thing. The second point is about the issues which we specifically talk about having the revenue sharing for different land partners, different companies like the private and the public companies. Here, as a company, CSL also we understood by operating 400 plus public EV charging station. So we realized that normally doing a standard supply procurement may not help the CPOs, because we realized that whenever we do a supply procurement for the EV charging station, the suppliers will have an specific interest of specific payment terms, where the payments are done upon supply, upon installation, and there's a less priority being given for the operating those EV charging station. In order to resolve those specific issues, which are more specific to operational parameters, now we are shifting from the supply contract to the CPO model, where we are trying, instead of buying the charges directly from the OEMs, we are trying to buy the charges from the CPOs, more like a service model. And here, as a company, we're also trying to enable some of the land partnership. We understand, since we also being a public company, we have better access to the land partners, be it the municipality, the distribution company, and even other government landowning agencies. So we are trying to aggregate those land parcels at the national level. So right now we have done the RFP for 8 cities, where we have aggregated the land parcel of close to 1,800 locations, where we are inviting companies and like the CPOs who could bid for those locations, and where we are keeping a benchmarking revenue sharing parameter. But here the role is more towards enabling the land partnership. Here CSL will not make an investment in the infrastructure, but we invite CPOs to bring in the investment, and they could build the stations, operate the stations for next like 8 to 10 years as per the agreement we have with the land partners. And typically they could operate their own CMS, and they could operate their own set of customers with a set tariff. So we are trying to see like how this, like being in this major CPO, are trying to promote the private organizations who are willing to make more investment in the charging business. This is some of the key steps we also trying to do apart from the guidelines which have been issued by the Ministry of Power. So other specific points in the MOP guidelines which needs a major intervention is that presently the state distribution company are not aligned to the MOP guidelines. So although the guidelines have been issued, I see there's a larger gap in understanding, because many times whenever we approach the distribution company for the power infrastructure, they're not completely aware of the available provisions in the schemes. So we also making a lot of representation about the recent MOP guidelines issued on 14th of January 2022 this year, stating that there is a provision of RDSS scheme where the upstream could be supported by the distribution company. But since these are not percolated to the state level, and this being a state subject, I think a larger operational framework has to be structured, where these guidelines could be like advice for the distribution company to be adopted, and which could support both the private and the public CPOs. So we are making our best efforts. So I think with the intervention by ministry and other supporting stakeholders, we should be able to get those benefits, which is applicable for both private and the public CPOs.
Great. Mr. Chaturvedi, your brief thoughts on the same.
So my thoughts are totally with Mr. Awadhesh, pain area for all the private CPOs, and that is common, because whatever is discussed or come on the table in terms of policy, that is when we go on a practical, that is totally different. So starting from the land allocations, or even from the first FAME subsidy, of course, we never got eligible for that, and we believe we will never get that. So that's why we stopped talking about that or chasing about that. So that is the one criteria. Second is, of course, the land. One point Mr. Jha mentioned that we have to match the L1 bidder. Either he is not from charging background, or from where he comes, we don't know, but they are quoting blindly, and we have to match. And that is where the complete ecosystem goes. Like anything, we have to, like he mentioned, somebody quoted 10 rupees, how he can manage. Same happened to us as well in one of government tenders we quoted, and then we have been asked to match the price, and that's where we have to work out from that. So that is, everybody knows who's working as a private CPO, so there is nothing to add much, because it's always a pain area when we are trying to get access of a government land. It could be a municipal corporation or anybody on a cheaper rate, because of course, as I mentioned, same is going to transmit to the end user tariff. So that is where we are right now. Second, on the power infrastructure side, of course, there are challenges as mentioned already. But on the operation side also, there are challenges. The fixed demand charges. Then there are other things in terms of taxes and all those things. It is mentioned in the policy that you will get 5.5 rupees. But there are duties, there are taxes, then TODs are there, and then fixed demand charges. So once you start to deploy a public charging infrastructure, and suppose you got a minimum 50 kilowatt load, so minimum 125 rupees per kVA you have to pay fixed demand charge, even if somebody is coming to charge or not. So we are ending up paying from our pocket even on the operation side. So these things we escalated many times, but none of the discoms are taking it seriously, because that is of course a challenge for them as well, because mostly loss making. So they are saying that we are loss making, how we can manage. But as a government policy, this should definitely get addressed, at least for some years. We are not asking a lifelong. For first few 2-3 years, when utilization factor should reach up to that level, we are targeting say 15 to 20% utilization, so that we should not end up paying from our pocket. Already we are paying on the capex. Then the infrastructure which we are talking, sometime it is happening like that, whatever the charger cost, it is 3 times on the electrical infra cost, because sometimes it is mentioned clearly a load above 25 kilowatt required a transformer. Why should we require a transformer for a 20-30 kilowatt charger within a cities? Even the excess load is available. So these are some typical practical behavior which we are facing day-to-day activity. And then of course, it is a DISCOM's perspective how they are going to handle your case. Because the moment we go for 100 kilowatt, their thought process is totally different. They are sometime coming with a total new connection from the 11 kV line tapping. So challenges are there, and we are always discussing on every forum that government should overcome with that. And we are expecting that at least from these 2 points, if we get some supports, because these are the major pillars for driving the tariff, real estate component and the DISCOM component. Then same is going to reflect to end user tariff. If I am charging someone 30 rupees, he will not come to a public charging infrastructure, because that is something he will end up per kilometer cost somewhere 4 rupees, 5 rupees, near about a petrol diesel car. So why he should adopt a EV? He will say, boss, why should I come to a commercial charging station? He will always charge a home or a workplace where cheaper rates are available. So for us as a CPU, it will be a challenge. So I believe it is already clearly mentioned, and we are expecting some solutions from government, because it's just a starting point, long way to go. And for making it sustainable or viable, we need these kind of support from government. Yeah.
Right. Mr. Annaswamy, a slightly different question for you. That, there's been so much discussion globally as well as in India, I believe, on interoperability and roaming, So what has been your experience in that space in the Indian market, and how does that compare with whatever's happening in Europe or US?
Yeah, see, roaming, when we look at multiple charge point operators willing to share their networks with each other to increase the utilization, is where roaming becomes viable. I mean, of course, from a user experience, we want users to have one common or not too many apps, but this we believe will change over time, because the apps will vanish. There'll be multiple ways of providing charging infrastructure. Once that goes, how do you ensure that anybody's network can be used by anybody? Which means the charge point operators need to get that alignment to say that they're willing to share the infrastructure. As a technology standards, you need to put in place proper standards for this to work. Europe already has multitude of standards. There are different countries using it. India, we have adopted one, and we are working with OCPI 2.2. I think that's kind of a roadmap which will come up, but it's not still standardized that it would be only that. So I'm assuming it's going to be that because it is industry-led. However, now what we see is we have the platform. We have enabled some of the large players to interoperate with each other. Different CPOs now have a kind of their own mental models to say how much do they want to share their infrastructure. Do they want to be the brand to be known by everybody, or do they want their assets to be used by somebody else who could take away their brand value? So there is that constant fear of marketing and branding, which people feel they don't want to share or they want to share. I'm quite sure this will go away over a period of time when the pressure of utilization of your chargers will come up and you want to get your ROI. I think that fear will go away, but there is this fear. We hear it from many people that they do not want to share. But my assumption is a year from now, probably this is not a topic of discussion, but currently it is a topic of discussion because people don't want to do it. So that's one what we see. And probably by 2023, we will see a lot of people roaming with each other, but it's not going to be as easy as what we saw in telecom, because interconnect and roaming are one of the most contentious issues when it comes to money transfer between the charge point operators. Just go back and see what's happening in the telecom world for the last 20 years. You will see what challenges will come up. And the same challenges will come up here in terms of getting your records right, getting your interconnect records right, so that you can actually do the right money transfer. These are challenges for tomorrow. I think that's probably something as an industry market, we will have to sort it out. But that's a way to go. And I'm quite sure we would be going forward in the coming years with all charge point operators interworking with each other. And also remember, market will consolidate. Now, probably you will see every day, probably 10 CPOs announcing that they would do something over a period of next 3 to 4 years. our understanding is it's like any other market. The dynamics will work and there will be consolidation, and there'll be only few large players who will set it up, a few niche players who will run niche charging networks, and there may be a long tail operators who will come up because of the kind of charging infrastructure, maybe in a residential place, workplace, office space, multiple places. So once these clusters form, then roaming is also relevant for some, not relevant for some. So we need to get market to reach that point where these clusters will form, and then the roaming agreements will naturally follow. But at this moment, everybody is trying to do it. But yeah, there are hurdles in doing those agreements.
Right. Okay. We still have about 20 minutes, I believe, by my watch. And I believe my colleague Sarthak has one or two questions that he would like to ask. So Sarthak, on to you now.
Thanks, Khushbu. There's some audience questions that have come up, and there's some questions that I've received personally as well. So I'll ask them first. So first, Mr. Mayank wanted to ask Varun that now EV cars are coming with maximum ranges. So in that case, is city charging infrastructure, city charging station, is it worthy?
I already mentioned that in city, there is a mixed behavior of charging. Most people are even personal users. They are more prone to charge at home. So home charging, then workplace charging, where it is developed by mostly your housing societies, if you are in a high-rise building, and then workplace by your employer, or even those tech parks. Right now we are talking, working with lots of tech parks because they are developing these kind of facility. So developing a pure commercial charging infrastructure is most suitable in cities are expected to use by the commercial user. I think we already in initial start of the discussion, we mentioned that. So it is not, you can expect that every personal user, until unless he don't have parking, like in Delhi or Mumbai or even other metro cities, lots of people are still parking at home. Those who are don't having a dedicated parking. So of course they will come to a public charging infrastructure. But we believe that the utilization, whatever utilization we are targeting, say 30% on a very optimistic case. If I give you an example with a daily hourly utilization, say 8 hours. So out of 8 hours, if you are targeting, so 6 hours is by a commercial user, and then rest 2 hours from a personal user, because their runs are quite limited. So they don't need to come up for a full charging every day. And second thing, beauty of EV is that you can own a small petrol bunk, like a fuel station at your home, at workplace and all those things. So viability is there, but yeah, you have to be very cautious while selecting the locations where you are putting a charging station, what ratings you are, you should not end up developing a high capex. As I mentioned, as per rating, you have to develop upstream electrical infra as well. So with all together, then you have to see the utilization. What is the utilization you are getting? So better to get going for 150 kilowatt one charger. Maybe you can scatter it with a 30 kilowatt capacity across 3-4 locations. Then it will make a more economic sense. Utilization will be there, but not for all the users. Even a highway, as I mentioned, it is for all the users are going to use, because they cannot use slow charging. So there you can put a high range, high capacity of the charger. So this is how we have clearly segregated the ecosystem, because they have the consumer behavior for a 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, 4-wheeler. Everybody have a different choice, different requirement of charging. And in that 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, battery swap is also an option. So you have to keep those perspective in the mind when you are developing such kind of charging infrastructure. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question from Kasvi as well. And she wants to ask that in many non-metropolitan regions, electricity is quite erratic. So how will this affect the EV charging space, and what can be done or is being done to resolve it? So maybe Mr. Jha, if you could answer this question.
Yeah. So see, for EV, one needs to understand that it has a path to follow. It is unlike that the non-metros, or I would say the tier 2 cities, will have the full-fledged EV adoption in the next 2 years or 3 years. So clearly this will remain generally confined to the large cities like, tier 1, particularly I believe the 1 million plus cities would be the primary initial phase for next 3-4 years till the time the EV cost comes at par with ICE. So that would be the thinking. And I believe if you think that perspective, and then considering the fact that the government of India during the last 1 decade have done a lot of good work on the electricity infrastructure side in making electricity available to the remotest part. I believe now the reliability of those supply is something where the government is trying to attend. And that's where the next 4 years, 5 years, we'll see a lot of improvement on those reliability aspect also. So we see a perfect alignment in the journey of the EV, that it will start with the larger cities and gradually go to the, as a main, I would say this mainstream product, go to the tier 2 cities. And by that time, you'll have a better electricity, either through the conventional means or a mini grid or a decentralized, the solar and other aspects. So I think that would be the line of progress on the EV, and that will take care of these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Zara. Mr. Mohan, there are a lot of questions on the fire hazards that have happened recently. So what do you think are the key safety precautions that EVSC players should take to avoid these fire hazards?
Yeah, so Sathak, like the most of the fire hazards which we have seen in many cities, more pertains to the electric vehicles. As such, if you look at the electric vehicle supply equipment, we have defined CA guidelines for safety standards, and all the EV charging stations, perhaps like the EV chargers or Evsc equipment, are all tested at the ARI lab or the ICAT lab, which are Enable accredited labs. So before procuring those EV charging stations, these are completely tested for performance and for safety and safety aspect. And also like for deployment also, we ensure like we follow the complete CA guidelines, and the most of our EV charging station, we ensure there are double earthing for each of the charging equipment. We also ensure there is a proper SPD arrangement for any of the lightning strike or any of the current rated instances. So ensure like at least on the charger side, the safety parameters are well defined. So morely, I think the large work has to happen on the vehicle segment side, because the batteries are one of the key component in the electric vehicles, and any compromise in the battery quality and any compromise in the battery BMS system could lead to such fire hazards. And also, like just to add some of the points on the power quality issues, where we normally face some of the operational issues for the EV charging stations. Yes, India has having the power supply qualities issues in some of the cities where the charges goes offline because of any voltage fluctuations. The charges suddenly goes to the sleep mode or to the offline mode. These are more as in safety requirement. But nonetheless, I think the OEMs need to rework, because most of the EV chargers which are being manufactured or built in India are not designed for Indian conditions, because India requires different specification, different product line, which should match the Indian conditions. Any momentary spike in the voltage or any momentary variation in the voltages, many times we are seeing the charges are going offline, which are affecting the EV users. Also, if we feel there is the process which has to be enabled, where these product improvements could happen at both ends. Also, just take a privilege to address some of the key issues like the CPOs are having, because see, as a CPOs, we have a good amount of learning in operating the charging stations at certain cities. Likewise, even the Volttic has some good learnings, and even the Fortum has a good learnings. But nowhere we're able to at least like accumulate or bring those learnings together. If any of the new CPOs are planned to enter into this particular segment, they make the same mistake what we would have done earlier. So there has to be a forum where these informations or good learning experience has to be reported or brought in. So this information could be made available to many of the upcoming or new CPOs, where instead of they making a repeated mistakes what you have done 2 years, they could better their product, and even the OEMs could learn from our experience, like how this specification could be improved and how the improvements they could make in the installation, the commissioning, and even the operational front is concerned. These are some of the, I think, key learnings which we all need to share, and which could be documented, reported, and made public for larger use.
I just want to add one point in Mohan comment. We are right now getting lots of inquiries or points saying that, sir, we want this kind of charger or in this range, price range. So I just want to mention, since we are a CPOs or anybody, if you are purchasing a Evsc either for home or a commercial, first thing, see the guidelines, what guidelines are mentioned either on the safety parameters or standards and all those things. Lots of, I don't want to comment any names, but there are hybrid chargers coming. There are 2,000-3,000 range chargers are coming. So their application is totally different. Means for a low battery capacity and for a four-wheeler, there is a different. So your current flow is a continuous. So you cannot use a 5 ampere socket for charging your car, even on a slow charging for 6 to 8 hours like that. So you have to understand which EVSE you are purchasing either for your personal use or for your commercial use, and then whether it is complying to the standard and properly tested or not. So these things we can take as a precaution to avoid any incident, and that's why as a Volttic we are ensuring we will not sell it out either. We are losing the business or anything is going to happen. But we will not come to a situation where it is a safety hazard to either vehicle, either to a person and all those things, because all the standards chargers are the OEMs who are making, they are taking care of all the safety precaution and well tested in the labs and all those things. So because we are discussing now these kind of questions we are getting at every forum. So I just want to mention these points. Don't go for a very cheaper, considering, okay, I can get it 1,500 rupees like that. And same time, also see it is standards adopted. Like it should not be something, some people are coming with a mix of this technology, that technology, just to cater a user demand. If user is saying, I want this, they are making like this. So these things we have to practice to avoid such failure and incident. Yeah.
Just to add to what Varun was telling. So I forgot to mention about the 3-pin sockets, which I think in many of the fire instances we found there is a short circuit and people are using the 3-pin sockets. But as a CPO, we don't recommend any of the 3-pin sockets. And even if we are building up a slow charger, normally we put the standard Bharat AC chargers, which are having the industrial connectors, which are meant for the longer cycles. But the residential sockets are not meant for the longer cycles. The moment there are some air gaps, which could lead to some of the fire issues. So I think OEM also, they should take that as a responsibility of educating the end customers, what is the right way of charging, what is the right connectors which they need to use for charging. If you start promoting that the people could charge electric vehicles by the 3-pin socket, some informations are partly correct. I think it is largely misleading the end customers. He will think the normal 3-pin socket is sufficient for the home charging, which may not be the case, and even it could affect the human life as well, what we are seeing in the recent the instances. So I think largely, I think the OEM should take the responsibility of educating and sensitizing the right information to the public by making like only on the exceptional they could use those sockets for charging, but largely they should promote the residential charging with proper the industrial connectors. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, Khushbu, maybe you can take on.
Thanks, Arthak. So actually, there were a couple of comments from a lot of delegates. For instance, Mr. Patel mentioned, what are the parameters that are being taken for maintaining the quality or any special steps for auditing for them. But I guess Mr. Chaturvedi and Mr. Mohan answered some of that. So we may just skip that question. Also, Mr. Ravikiran, there is a comment from Mr. Mayank Singh that there is a company Noun, N-O-U-N, which is which he says or he believes is matches with your thoughts or your perspective. So he just wants you to know that. So, and if there is anything else that any of the panelists would like to say, then they can please go ahead. Otherwise, we can just end the session here.
Yeah, Khushbu, so I mean the 2 points. I mean this is a kind of taking forward what Mr. Mohan had indicated as a part of the new guidelines. See, couple of things about the new guidelines or the way Ministry of Power has been working on the guide. First of all, just a fact that it is mentioned in the guidelines on 14 January that there would be a single part tariff, at least up to 2025. Immediately after that, in the next tariff order, Telangana regulators discontinued the single part tariff and they continued with the two parts. So they reintroduced the fixed demand, which they had put it on hold for last 2 years, based on this. Similarly, the second example I'm giving you, the guidelines have been saying that there would be a service fee cap, and at the same time, DISCOM would be giving the connection in 7 days and 15 days. Now, DISCOM doesn't give you connection in 7 days and 15 days, but they pick up this capping of the service fee. The point I'm trying to say is that the guidelines, since it doesn't have the statutory effect, believe me, this guidelines is not emanating from Electricity Act. These are the wishes of the Ministry of Power, which they want to do a good for the benefit of the ecosystem. That's fantastic. But the problem is that the state has this is a concurrent subject. And unless you back up this with the statutory measures, states are going to pick and choose. And what you are doing through these guidelines is that you are giving that discretionary power to the state. So where they pick, which helps them, and they discard, which helps the ecosystem. So what is happening in the process? The entire initiative gets defeated because you end up paying more and getting no return in, no benefit in return, right? So the classic example I'll give you is that now in these guidelines, government has gone one step further to distort the entire ecosystem. The people believe that the guidelines is fantastic. I believe this guideline is creating much more confusion in the system than doing a very good things. The example is that it says that now if you take the EV connection at the EV tariff, you are within the realm of possibilities that your fee would be capped by the nodal agencies. Now this is bizarre because EV is no longer a concession. This is a separate classification of tariff under Electricity Act. Now, if it is a separate classification of tariff, it means what you are doing, you are determining the price. I understand you are giving a price which is favorable for the EV, but it's just an input price. And after that, a lot of things are added and then offered to the end consumer. It is like if the steel industry gets industrial, connections, then you say that fine, your product of, price would be determined by the government. This is bizarre. So I think this is something where the government or the Ministry of Power is better leave it to the ecosystem. They have done enough good, in terms of delicensing and creating a separate EV tariff. These are the two things which was required. Now, rest of the things, they should leave it to the stakeholders in the market. That will be a greater service. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mohan, Mr. Annaswamy, or Mr. Chaturvedi, if you have any last comments or points to make, you can.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Awadhesh, because see, the state DISCOM role have to be redefined. Presently, they're not aligned with the MOP guidelines issued for the EV charging infrastructure or even with the state EV policies. Because these DISCOMs are bound to follow the state LCD regulatory commission norms. Unless these are mandated through a regulatory process, DISCOMs have some reluctance to follow the guidelines. So far, like we also understand, these state DISCOMs rules have to be strongly be redefined, such that whatever the operational framework have to be structured, which could be structured well within the regulatory framework. So such benefits of the single part tariff or even getting the connection on the priority basis could be implemented. Right now, all these are in the guidelines, but unless it is implemented, it is not going to benefit the ecosystem partners, and this mobility may not be able to scale up very fast. The second thing, as previously I said, like I think CPOs need to start sharing the information and their best learnings, because we understand like we have some of the best, we have some of the important learnings, and maybe likewise the Volttic and Fortum would be having some of the best learnings where they're operating their EV charging station. Until we all collaborate and bring our best experience and start sharing out this information, it is likely that we may end up doing the same mistake what others would be doing. So I think it's a right time where industry need to collaborate and start sharing their best, the practical or operational experience, which could benefit overall ecosystem growth.
Right. Mr. Annaswamy, if you have any closing thoughts.
I'll keep it short. I want the ecosystem to thrive. So whatever policy and whatever needs to be done, because for us, all of them in the call are my customers, potential customers. Right. So I want them to succeed for us to build the right products for them. Only request I have for all my ecosystem players and CPOs is that don't cut corners. Please plan for systemic growth. If you don't do that, we are building infrastructure for country, which is going to be a huge issue 5 years from now. If we don't do it right now, we will all regret 5 years from now. So I've seen this as my experience. We are running several thousand chargers now. We know the problems. We know from every OEM, every CPO kind of problems. And I mean, like Mohan was saying, we actually already share with among all our CPOs the learnings from each other, because we know exactly the problems which each one has. And we already try to help them, but we see the quality of products coming on the field, not really in the right shape. The quality of infrastructure, not in good shape. Quality of connectivity, not in good shape. I'm not being critical here or cynical here. A lot of things are not in good shape. So though we all talk very positive, we need to also keep in mind that unless we fix those basic things, we will not be able to scale well. We will scale, but not in the right direction. So that's my only request, and I want everybody to do it very systemically and do it with the right products. Don't cut corners.
Right, Mr. Chaturvedi, I believe you have the final say of the day. So your just 1 minute or summarization of everything.
So I believe you heard to everyone, and we are totally aligned because we are a part of ecosystem and we are facing same challenges in reference to CPOs or in terms of quality of product, in terms of utilizations. Challenges are there, of course. And I would like to thank at least to Mohan and Mr. Jha, because we are working since 2017. So we have faced all the challenges till now. We had witnessed all the ups and downs, and it's still a long way to go. Lots of discussion happens around the charging infrastructure that we are not flourishing very fast. So we need to understand that we are not a Europe or US, we are an Indian, and every geography have their own challenges. So of course we have to overcome that challenge, and that is where it is taking time in terms of infrastructure, locations, power, everywhere. But everybody is giving their best. All CPOs are working, whatever business model they have. I believe at least 4 or 5 companies, those who started early, everybody knows what they have faced when nothing was known, and now everything is clear. So we are in a right track. We don't need to chase the numbers because it is totally aligned with the utilization, business economics, and of course the practical challenges what we just discussed. So being a user, they also need to understand, need not to always pinpoint on the charging infrastructure. It's growing, and next 2-3 years, of course, you will see lots of installation, lots of beautiful installation you will see. But yeah, it's a infrastructure, so it will take time, and everybody is firm on that. Everybody is positive on that. But we need support being a private operator from government side, from the others policy side, so that we keep on a faster pace or acceleration so that we get more charging station in quick time. This is what we are looking at. With this, I believe I'll stop here. If anybody wants to add, definitely most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chaturvedi. And with that, we'd like to close this webinar. So thank you so very much to all our speakers, Mr. Jha, Mr. Annaswamy, Mr. Mohan, and Mr. Chaturvedi for taking time out for this today. Thank you, and a clap for you. And I also like to thank all the delegates who were there and who put up some very interesting questions. I would also like to inform you that our next roundtable is on role of utilities in EV charging space, which is on July 4. So I would request you to please keep a lookout for that. For the people who attended this event, we will automatically be sending you the login link for that one. So you need not register again. And we do hope to see you at the next roundtable. If you have any feedback, comments, please feel free to write to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.